Jim Henson from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, at en.wikipedia.org. Jim Henson, born James Maury Henson in September 24, 1936, was the most widely known American puppeteer in American television history. He was the creator of The Muppets and the leading force behind their long creative run in the television series Sesame Street and The Muppet Show, and films such as The Muppet Movie in 1979 and The Dark Crystal in 1982. He was also an Oscar-nominated film director, Emmy Award-winning television producer, and the founder of the Jim Henson Company, the Jim Henson Foundation, and Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Henson is widely acknowledged for the ongoing vision of faith, friendship, magic, and love which infused nearly all of his work. Henson died on May 16, 1990, of organ failure due to infection by bacterial pneumonia. His sudden death resulted in an outpouring of public and professional affection, culminating in a memorial service. There have since been numerous tributes and dedications to his memory. Henson's companies, which are now run by his children, continue to produce films and television shows. Contents. Section 1. Early Life. Section 2. Struggles and Projects in the 1960s. Section 3. Sesame Street. Section 4. Finding a Wider Audience. Section 5. Transition to the Big Screen. Section 6. Later Work. Section 7. Death. Section 8. Business Legacy. Section 9. Tributes. Section 10. Footnotes. Section 11. References. Section 12. External links. Image. Jim Henson at the 1989 Emmy Awards. Section 1. Early Life. Henson was born in Greenville, Mississippi to Paul Ransom Henson, an agronomist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and Elizabeth Marcella Henson. After spending his early childhood in Leland, Mississippi, he moved with his family to Hyattsville, Maryland, near Washington, D.C. in the late 1940s. Henson was raised as a Christian Scientist. He later remembered the arrival of the family's first television as, quote, the biggest event of his adolescence, end quote, being heavily influenced by radio ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and the early television puppets of Burr Tillstrom on Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, and Bill and Cora Baird. In 1954, while attending Northwestern High School, he began working for WTOP-TV, creating puppets for a Saturday morning cartoon show. In 1954, while attending Northwestern High School, he began working for WTOP-TV, creating puppets for a Saturday morning children's show. After graduating from high school, Henson enrolled at University of Maryland College Park as a studio arts major, thinking he might become a commercial artist. A puppetry class offered in the Applied Arts Department introduced him to the craft and textiles courses in the College of Home Economics, and he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Home Economics in 1960. As a freshman, he was asked to create Sam and Friends, a 5-minute puppet show for WRC-TV. The characters on Sam and Friends were already recognizable Muppets, and the show included a primitive version of what would become Henson's most famous character, Kermit the Frog. In the show, he began experimenting with techniques that would change the way puppetry was used on television, including using the frame defined by the camera shot to allow the puppeteer to work from off-camera. Henson believed that the television puppets needed to have, quote, life and sensitivity, end quote, and so, at a time when many puppets were made out of carved wood, Henson began making characters from flexible, fabric-covered foam rubber, allowing them to express a wider array of emotions. In contrast to a marionette, whose arms are manipulated by strings, Henson used rods to move his Muppet's arms, allowing for greater control of expression. When Henson began work on Sam and Friends, he asked fellow University of Maryland freshman Jane Nebel to assist him. The show was a financial success, But after graduating from college, Jim began to have doubts about going into a career as a puppeteer. He wandered off to Europe for several months, where he was inspired by European puppeteers who looked on their work as a form of art. Henson returned to the United States, and he and Jane began dating. They were married in 1959 and had 5 children: Lisa, born 1960, Cheryl, born 1962, Brian, born 1963, John, born 1965, and Heather, born 1970. Image: an early incarnation of Henson's most famous character, Kermit the Frog, in a scene from the 50s television show Sam and Friends. Section 2. Struggles and Projects in the 1960s. Despite the success of Sam and Friends, which ran for 6 years, Henson spent much of the next 2 decades working in commercials, talk shows, and children's projects before being able to realize his dream of the Muppets as, quote, entertainment for everybody, end quote. The popularity of his work on Sam and Friends in the late 50s led to a series of guest appearances on network talk and variety shows. Henson himself appeared as a guest on many shows, including The Ed Sullivan Show. The greatly increased exposure led to hundreds of commercial appearances by Henson characters through the 60s. Among the most popular of Henson's commercials was a series for the local Wilkins Coffee Company in Washington, D.C., in which his Muppets were able to get away with a greater level of slapstick violence than might otherwise have been acceptable with human actors. In the first Wilkins ad, a Muppet named Wilkins is poised behind a cannon seen in profile. Another Muppet named Watkins is in front of its barrel. Wilkins asks, quote, "What do you think of Wilkins coffee?" end quote, to which Watkins responds gruffly, quote, "Never tasted it," end quote. Wilkins fires the cannon and blows Watkins away, then turns the cannon directly toward the viewer and ends the ad with, quote, "Now, what do you think of Wilkins coffee?" end quote. Henson later explained, quote, "Till then, advertising agencies believed that the hard sell was the only way to get their message over on television. We took a very different approach. We tried to sell things by making people laugh," end quote. The first 7-second commercial for Wilkins was an immediate hit and was syndicated and reshot by Henson for local coffee companies across the United States. He ultimately produced more than 300 coffee ads. In 1963, Henson and his wife moved to New York City, where the newly formed Muppets Incorporated would reside for some time. When Jane quit Muppeteering to raise their children, Henson hired writer Jerry Jewell in 1961 and puppeteer Frank Oz in 1963 to replace her. Henson later credited both with developing much of the humor and character of his Muppets. Henson and Oz particularly developed a close friendship and a performing partnership that lasted 27 years. Their teamwork is particularly evident in their portrayals of the characters of, respectively, Bert and Ernie, and Kermit and Fozzie Bear. Henson's 60s talk show appearances culminated when he devised Rolf, a piano-playing anthropomorphic dog. Rolf became the first Muppet to make regular appearances on a network show, The Jimmy Dean Show. From 1964 to 1968, Henson began exploring filmmaking and produced a series of experimental films. His 9-minute timepiece was nominated by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for an Oscar for short film in 1966. Jim Henson also produced another experimental film, the NBC TV movie The Cube, in 1969. Section 3. Sesame Street. Main article, Sesame Street. In 1969, Joan Gans Cooney and the team from the Children's Television Workshop asked Henson to work on Sesame Street, a visionary children's program for public television. Part of the show was set aside for a series of funny, colorful puppet characters living on the titular street. These included Oscar the Grouch, Bert and Ernie, Cookie Monster, and Big Bird. Henson performed the characters of Ernie, game show host Guy Smiley, and Kermit, who appeared as a roving television news reporter. It was around this time that a frill was added around Kermit's neck to make him more frog-like. The collar was also used to cover the joint where the neck met the body of the Muppet. At first, Henson's Muppets appeared separately from the realistic segments on the street, but after a poor test screening in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the show was revamped to integrate the two and place much greater emphasis on Henson's work. Though Henson would often downplay his role in Sesame Street's success, brackets, it is one of the longest-running U.S. television shows in history and has received 109 Emmy Awards to date, more than any other TV show, end brackets. Cooney frequently praised his work, and in 1990, the Public Broadcasting Service called him, quote, the spark that ignited our fledgling broadcast service, end quote. The success of Sesame Street also allowed Henson to stop producing commercials. He later remembered that, quote, it was a pleasure to get out of that world, end quote. Concurrently with the first years of Sesame Street, Henson directed Tales from Muppet Land, a short series of TV movie specials aimed at a young audience and hosted by Kermit the Frog. The series included Hey Cinderella, The Frog Prince, and The Muppet Musicians of Bremen. These specials were comedic tellings of classic fairy tale stories. Image. Two of Sesame Street's most famous characters, Ernie, played by Henson, and Bert, played by Frank Oz. Section 4. Finding a wider audience. Henson, Oz, and his team targeted an adult audience with a series of sketches on the first season of the groundbreaking comedy series Saturday Night Live. 11 sketches, set mostly in the land of Gorch, aired between October 1975 and January 1976, with 4 additional appearances in March, April, May, and September. Henson recalled that, quote, I saw what creator Lorne Michaels was going for, and I really liked it and wanted to be part of it. But somehow, what we were trying to do and what the writers could write for it never gelled, end quote. The SNL writers never got comfortable writing for the characters, and frequently disparaged Henson's creations. One, Michael O'Donoghue, memorably quipped, quote, I won't write for Felt, end quote. Around the time of his character's final appearances on SNL, Henson began developing 2 projects featuring the Muppets, a Broadway show and a weekly television series. The series was initially rejected by the American networks, who believed that the Muppets would only appeal to children. In 1976, Henson was finally able to convince British impresario Lou Grade to finance the show, which would be shot in the United Kingdom and syndicated across the globe. That same year, he abandoned work on the Broadway show and moved his creative team to England, where The Muppet Show began filming. The show featured Kermit as host, a variety of other memorable characters including Miss Piggy, Gonzo the Great, and Fozzie Bear. A vaudeville-style variety show aimed at a family audience, but with a frequently satirical, mature sense of humor, The Muppet Show became a sensation in the United Kingdom and soon elsewhere in the world. By 1978, it was being watched by 235 million people in 106 countries every week, and Time magazine referred to it as, quote, almost certainly the most popular television entertainment now being produced on Earth, end quote. Much of the credit was given to Henson, whom Time called, quote, genius, end quote. On The Muppet Show, Henson performed Kermit the Frog, Rolf the Dog, The Swedish Chef, Mana Mana, Link Hogthrob, Waldorf, and Dr. Teeth. Henson's role in Muppet productions was often compared by his co-workers to Kermit's role on The Muppet Show, a shy, gentle boss with, quote, a whim of steel, end quote, who, quote, ran things as firmly as it is possible to run an explosion in a mattress factory, end quote. Carol Spinney, the puppeteer of Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, remembered that Henson, quote, would never say he didn't like something. He would just go, That was famous. And if he liked it, he would say, lovely, end quote. Henson himself recognized Kermit as an alter ego, though he thought that Kermit was bolder than he was. He once said of Kermit, quote, he can say things I hold back, end quote. Image. Frank Oz performing Miss Piggy and Henson performing Kermit on the set of the breakthrough TV series The Muppet Show. Section 5. Transition to the big screen. 3 years after the start of The Muppet Show, the Muppets appeared in their first theatrical feature film, 1979's The Muppet Movie. The film was both a critical and financial success. It made $65.2 million domestically, and at the time was the 61st highest-grossing film ever made. A song from the film, The Rainbow Connection, sung by Henson as Kermit, hit number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was nominated for an Academy Award. In 1981, a Henson-directed sequel, The Great Muppet Caper, followed, and Henson decided to end the still popular Muppet Show to concentrate on making films. From time to time, the Muppet characters continued to appear in made-for-TV movies and television specials. In addition to his own puppetry projects, Henson also aided others in their work. In 1979, he was asked by the producers of the Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back, to aid makeup artist Stuart Freeborn in the creation and articulation of enigmatic Jedi Master Yoda. Henson suggested to Star Wars creator George Lucas that he use Frank Oz as the puppeteer and voice of Yoda. Oz voiced Yoda in Empire and each of the 4 subsequent Star Wars films, and the naturalistic, lifelike Yoda became one of the most popular characters in the Star Wars films. In 1982, Henson founded the Jim Henson Foundation to promote and develop the art of puppetry in the United States. Around that time, he also began creating darker and more realistic fantasy films that did not feature the Muppets and displayed, quote, a growing, brooding interest in mortality, end quote. With 1982's The Dark Crystal, which he co-directed with Frank Oz and also co-wrote, Henson said he was, quote, trying to go toward a sense of realism, toward a reality of creatures that are actually alive, where it's not so much a symbol of the thing, but you're trying to present the thing itself, end quote. To provide a visual style distinct from the Muppets, the puppets in The Dark Crystal were based on conceptual artwork by Brian Froud. Crystal was a financial and critical success, and a year later, The Muppets starring The Muppets Take Manhattan, directed by Frank Oz, did fair box office business, grossing $25.5 million domestically and ranking as one of the top 40 films of 1984. However, 1986's Labyrinth, a crystal-like fantasy that Henson directed by himself, was created, in part due to its cost, a commercial disappointment. Despite some positive reviews, brackets, the New York Times called it, quote, a fabulous film, end quote, end brackets, the commercial failure of Labyrinth demoralized Henson to the point that Brian Henson remembered the time of its release as being, quote, the closest I've seen him to turning in on himself and getting quite depressed, end quote. Brackets, the film later became a cult classic, end brackets. Henson and his wife also separated the same year, although they remained close for the rest of his life. Jane later said that Jim was so involved with his work that he had very little time to spend with her or their children. All 5 of his children began working on Muppets at an early age, partly because, Cheryl Henson remembered, quote, one of the best ways of being around him was to work with him. Section 6. Later work. Though he was still engaged in creating children's programming, such as the successful 80s shows Fraggle Rock and the animated Muppet Babies, Henson continued to explore darker, mature themes with a folktale and mythology-oriented show, The Storyteller, in 1988. The Storyteller won an Emmy for Outstanding Children's Program, but was canceled after 9 episodes. The next year, Henson returned to television with The Jim Henson Hour, which mixed lighthearted Muppet fare with riskier material. The show was critically well received and won Henson another Emmy for Outstanding Directing in a Variety or Music Program, but was canceled after 13 episodes due to low ratings. Henson blamed its failure on NBC's constant rescheduling. In 1989, Henson entered into negotiations to sell his company to the Walt Disney Company for almost $150 million, hoping that, with Disney handling business matters, he would, quote, be able to spend a lot more time on the creative side of things, end quote. By 1990, he had completed production on a television special, The Muppets at Walt Disney World, and a Disney World (brackets later Disney's California Adventure as well, and brackets attraction), Jim Henson's Muppet Vision 3D, and was developing film ideas and a television series entitled Muppet High. Image. Henson's 1989 television series, The Jim Henson Hour, mixed familiar Muppets such as Kermit with darker, more realistic creatures and stories. While busy on these later projects, on May 13, 1990, Henson began to experience flu-like symptoms. He consulted a physician in North Carolina who could find no evidence of pneumonia by physical examination and prescribed no treatment except aspirin. By the next day, May 14th, he was coughing up blood. At 4:58 a.m. on Tuesday, May 15th, Henson could no longer breathe on his own and was admitted to New York Hospital with abscesses in his lungs. He was placed on a mechanical ventilator to help him breathe, but his condition deteriorated rapidly into septic shock despite aggressive treatment with multiple antibiotics. Only 21 hours later, on May 16, 1990, Henson died from organ failure at the age of 53. The cause of death was first reported as Streptococcus pneumonia, a bacterial infection. Bacterial pneumonia is usually caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae, a alpha hemolytic species of Streptococcus. Henson, however, died of organ failure due to infection by Streptococcus pyogenes, a severe Group A streptococcal infection that engulfed his body. Streptococcal pyogenes is the bacteria that causes scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, and, in Henson's case, can cause toxic shock syndrome. Henson's life could possibly have been saved had he gone to the hospital a few hours earlier. 2 separate memorial services were held for Henson, one in New York City at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and one in London, England, at St. Paul's Cathedral. As per Henson's wishes, no one in attendance wore black, and a Dixieland jazz band finished the service by performing When the Saints Go Marching In. Harry Belafonte sang Turn the World Around, a song he had debuted on The Muppet Show, as each member of the audience waved, with a puppeteer's rod, an individual brightly colored foam butterfly. Later, in what was one of the most touching moments of the service, Big Bird, performed by Carol Spiney, walked out onto the stage and sang a quavering rendition of Kermit the Frog's signature song, Bein' Green. In the final minutes of the 2.5-hour service, 6 of the core Muppet performers sang, in their characters' voices, a medley from Jim Henson's favorite songs, culminating in a performance of Just One Person that began with Richard Hunt singing alone as Scooter. Quote, as each verse progressed, Henson employee Chris Berry recalled, each Muppeteer joined in with their own Muppets until the stage was filled with all of the Muppet performers and their beloved characters. The funeral was later described by Life as, quote, an epic and almost unbearably moving event, end quote. The image of a growing number of performers singing just one person was especially powerful. It was recreated for the 1990 television special, The Muppets Celebrate Jim Henson, and inspired screenwriter Richard Curtis, who attended the London service, to write a growing orchestra wedding scene of his 2003 film, Love Actually. Section 8. Business Legacy. The Jim Henson Company and the Jim Henson Foundation continued after his death, producing new series and specials. Jim Henson's Creature Shop, founded by Henson, also continues to build creatures for a large number of other films and series, brackets, most recently, the science fiction production Farscape, the film adaptation of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the movie Mirror Mask, end brackets, and is considered one of the most advanced and well-respected creators of film creatures. His son, Brian, and daughter, Lisa, are currently the co-chairs and co-CEOs of the company. His daughter, Cheryl, is the president of the foundation. Steve Whitmire, a veteran member of the Muppet puppeteering crew, has assumed the roles of Kermit the Frog and Ernie, the most famous characters formerly played by Jim Henson. On February 17, 2004, It was announced that the Muppets, brackets, excluding the Sesame Street characters, which are separately owned by Sesame Workshop, and brackets, and the Bear in the Big Blue House properties have been sold by Henson's heirs to the Walt Disney Company. The Jim Henson Company retains the Creature Shop, as well as the rest of its film and television library, including Fraggle Rock, Farscape, The Dark Crystal, and Labyrinth. Section 9. Tributes. The following is a bullet list of tributes. Henson is tributed both as himself and as Kermit the Frog on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The only other person to receive this honor is Mel Blanc, the voice actor of Bugs Bunny. The classes of 1994, 1998, and 1999 at the University of Maryland College Park commissioned a life-size statue of Henson and Kermit the Frog, which was dedicated on September 24, 2003, Henson's 67th birthday. The statue cost $217,000 US and is displayed outside the UMCP Student Union. In 2006, UMCP introduced 50 statues of their school mascot, Testudo the Terrapin, with various designs chosen by different sponsoring groups. Among them was Curdle, a statue by Washington, D.C. artist Elizabeth Baldwin, designed to look like Kermit the Frog. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze, and The Muppet Christmas Carol are both dedicated to Jim Henson. The television special The Muppets Celebrate Jim Henson allowed the Muppets themselves to pay tribute to Henson. The special featured interviews with Steven Spielberg and others. A museum was built in memory of Henson in Leland, Mississippi. Official certificates from the Mississippi legislature honoring Jim Henson and Muppets paraphernalia are on display. Tom Smith's Henson tribute song, A Boy and His Frog, won the Pegasus Award for Best Filk Song in 1991. This sound file and all text in the article are licensed under the GNU Free Documentation License, available at www.gnu.org/copyleft/FDL.html.